Welcome to part 8, where we talk about web components which are reusable. On this page, there are two web components, although it doesn't seem like web components. This header, this H2 in red, is a web component, as well as this label for the button and my button are web components. Let's look at the HTML fragment. We have two sections, the main section and the comp or component section. This is just regular HTML with a span and a button. The component also has a span, but there's this item or this new element called my btn and my h2. So let's see how these web components are built. But how? First look at how we style this blue button, big blue button. So button, all buttons have a font size of extra large, some border radius, a background color and a margin. And when you click on it, the button becomes active, so it's button active. The font or text color becomes Alice blue, which is a light color, and the background becomes a dark blue. On with components. Now components are built with templates. These templates are inserted into the main index.html. So here we have the template with an ID my h2 without the hyphen. It's got styling built into the template. So in this case, H2s are red in color. And here is the H2 element. And there's this thing called slot, a slot element, which we'll talk about just in a while. Now, although template is in the main index.html, the browser does not render templates. So templates are not visible. In order to make use of them, we need to clone, then insert the clone templates content into the index.html DOM using JavaScript. Of course, JavaScript. Here's the JavaScript. In the JavaScript, we have we use the custom elements API to define my -h2. That's the my h2 element which you saw. Let me show you again. This is my h2, and later we'll talk about my dash button. So we define my h2 as a class, right? So there's a comma here and a close bracket here. So that's the class. From line 2 to line 9 is the class. So there are two arguments to the custom elements define: a string, which defines the element my -h2, and the class. And there's only one method, if you like, just a constructor in this class. And this class extends HTML element. First thing the constructor does is calls the superclass, whatever HTML element has to do. And then it grabs hold of the template by getting the my h2 element by ID. This is where things get interesting. So when I say this on line 6, this means the custom element that's being created. We attach to the custom element that's being created a shadow DOM with mode open. We'll talk about mode open in a while. And we assign it to a constant known as shadow root. And to this shadow root, we append the clone of the template content. Now, a shadow DOM is exactly like a regular DOM, except that's hidden away in the shadows. That's why it's called a shadow DOM. Thus, whatever you do inside the shadow DOM in terms of styling cannot affect the browser's DOM. So it is like an encapsulated object, which is why we use classes. Now let's talk about slot elements. In the myH2 template, we have a slot here on line 29. So these are placeholders for contents to be slotted in or inserted. That's why they're called slots. Therefore, when I issue a string like myH2, my header, close myH2, this string, my header, is inserted into this slot. And we can have name slots. So in my button, this is the definition of my button. I have my button, this is the button text. We'll see why it's the button text later. And then we have a span. A span is just a string of letters or numbers, or a string of characters actually. And that's supposed to go into a slot named label. And that span is click me. So my button gets inserted into the unnamed slot because we didn't name it. That my button goes to the unnamed slot. And here we have a slot name named label. Name slot named label. So this click me goes into this label slot. Why do we call it a label slot? Because in the template fragment we have a label which encapsulates a button. What is a label that encapsulates a button? Well, if you click on the button, of course the button fires, but you can also click on the label to fire the button. Right. So let's look at the main.js on how we can hook on main.js JavaScript to reach inside the shadow DOM. So mode open here, as I promised we'll talk about, right, allows the browser's DOM to reach into the shadow DOM. If you say mode close, then it's closed. The main browser's DOM, the main browser's JavaScript cannot reach into the shadow DOM or shadow root. So we have a my button handler. This is in main.js. Main.js, you can look at it later. We look at we use a query selector to call up my button. How did do that? My button is this my button is the element my dash button. We assign, and the shadow root B, because we attach shadow, is got a property or a element. Property is better. A property or member known as shadow root. And in the shadow root we can call query selector again. So what we are doing here is, let's look at the template. This is inside the shadow root. We are reaching inside the shadow root to find the button element. So that's why we are looking for the button element under the shadow root, and we assign it to the constant button. And in that button constant, we assign an event listener, and this just issues my button clicked every time we click on it. So let's look at what we have. Let me close this. That is just right click, inspect. You can see the console there. So that's my button, the main button. You click on it, styling changes. This Alice blue with a dark blue background. And when I click on my button, it shows up in the console log. There we have it. Thank you for listening.